Hello, everyone. So, today we're talking about the liberal theories of international relations. And like we did the last time, here we are going to discuss this second category of international relations theories, which is another category that is older, that is in the older category, or that is one of the older approaches to the study of international relations. Remember, we said that of the three categories that exist, two of them are older than the critical theory, being the realist category, the liberal category of theories are more traditional, you know, are older theories, compared to the critical theories of international relations. So that's we're trying to identify what are some of these liberal theories, what are their major arguments, their proponents, and all what we did with the realist category as well. Now, you will observe that the international system is made up of so many states that seem to practice largely either, or that seem to be driven or motivated largely by either a realist philosophy or a liberal philosophy, and how, or a mixture of the two in some cases. And how do you identify states that are driven by either realist philosophy or liberal philosophy? States that are driven by realist philosophy are states that are, you know, very quick to to tolerate human rights violations. States that insist that their traditional cultural belief systems would remain and will not give way to the larger international culture of free media, free press, freedom of speech, all right, equality for women and men. States that seem to want to suppress and are not very open to these more inclusive, more equal societies. States that will invest more in nuclear programs. States that would, that want to launch nuclear missiles, want to test their nuclear weapons. All of these are characteristics of states that are driven or that are motivated by the realist philosophy. Whereas on the other hand, states that are motivated by liberal philosophies are those that are more, they're more open, they are more dynamic, they are more accommodating. All right, those are states that are more on the liberal side. All right, so you can easily identify what philosophy drives what states by just observing the kinds of behavioral patterns of these states in the international system. All right, so liberalism is one of those other, is one of the two traditional theories of international relations, and of course, liberalism emphasizes, the role of international laws, the role of international organizations. It emphasizes also respect for individuals, who are the citizens within these states that are members of the international system. All right, so liberalism, unlike realism, considers these individuals, considers the citizens, and ensures or tries to ensure that these individuals and citizens are properly, are given opportunities to develop, to live securely, peacefully, within the communities they find themselves. Now, there are quite a number of assumptions of the liberal theories. There's so many assumptions of the liberal theories, but some of the ones that we're going to be paying more attention to, or closer attention to, are the ones that are listed on the screen. Of course, so many assumptions by so many scholars, most likely reiterating much of the same point. Okay, but like I said, liberal theories, believe that beyond just state actors, there are other actors that are equally important in the international system. There are other non-state actors. There are NGOs. There are international organizations. Like we said, they value the role of international organizations. Excuse me. They value the role of international law. They value the role of businesses, investors, investments, and all of these civil society groups and all these other non-state actors are also valued, are also emphasized, are also appreciated, in the liberal category. So not just states, but other actors are also involved in the scheme of things, and they're equally important. So the liberal theory assumes, and you'll be seeing examples of these as we identify some of the theories that fall under the liberal category. Also, it emphasizes too the role, of the representatives within the states. The fact that the state, remember in the realist category, we said that the state is a unitary and a rational actor because it's able to aggregate the the interests of all the groups within it. All right. Excuse me. That also is true about the liberal category. In the liberal category, the state, the state ensures that the foreign policy of the state is a reflection, takes into cognizance largely, the interests of the groups that are within it. Now, the difference between the realist and the liberal category in this assumption is that while the liberal category allows for these various groups within the state, allows for their interests, their objectives to be to determine the foreign policy of the state. All right. In the liberal category, the state allows these other groups determine what the foreign policy of the state is, what direction the state goes, how the state behaves. So essentially, the behavior of the state is determined by all of these variables and actors that are within it, including individuals too. I mean, not just investors, but even ordinary citizens as well. All right. So that is the liberal category. But the realist, on the realist hand, the state acts on behalf of these other groups. So the state is able to harness, harvest the interest of these other groups within it when the need arises, and the state ultimately decides what direction of foreign policy, what behavior pattern the state finally executes. Okay, so the difference essentially is that in the realist category, the state is the ultimate determinant of its action. The state decides finally what it does, regardless of what the interests of these other groups, of these other actors within it are. The state determines what its behavior, what its policy is, in line with the interest of the state. But in the liberal category, the interests and concerns of the actors, individuals within the state are what determine ultimately the behavior of the state. So that is the difference between the liberal assumption of the involvement of actors within the state in determining the policy of the state, determining the interests of the state, the behavior of the state, as opposed to those on the realist or in the realist category. All right. Of course, another assumption is the fact that the international system, the direction that the international system takes also determines the behavior of the state. So the preference internationally, the preference of the international system determines what the state eventually decides to do or how the state behaves. In this case, of course, it is obvious that, as an example, the international system has a preference for women equality, for gender equality, for gender balance. That's the preference of the international system, with regards to involvement of, men and women in the participation in politics and other sectors of society. That's the preference, So a state that is driven by a liberal philosophy would naturally be leaning towards allowing more men and more women equally, to get involved in the scheme of things. So it will be striving towards gender equality. All right, but a state that is liberal will not necessarily be paying attention to such international preference of equality for both sexes. All right, so those are some of the assumptions of the liberal category. And of course, the liberal category also argues in favor of religious freedom, religious liberty. It also argues in favor of human rights protections, like I've said earlier. It argues in favor, of more collaboration, more cooperation, among the actors that exist in the international system. All right, and of course, you can see names of so many authorities or scholars who have propounded and who have expanded or emphasized these liberal philosophies and ideologies. Now we'll go into looking at some of the variants, some of the colorations, some of the shades of the liberal theory. There are three of them that are listed here. The first one is the ideational liberal theory, and here this shade, this color, this class of liberal theory deals more with sociocultural ideas, sociocultural belief systems. All right, the kinds of belief systems that sociocultural belief systems that drive a people, would ultimately determine how their states would, or how such a state would behave. The state that houses these people as its population. All right. So, for instance, if the Nigerian state, or if Nigerians are driven by a sociocultural belief of being religious fanatics, of being so religiously motivated, then it is more likely that the Nigerian state would tilt towards, such fanatical behaviors, such emphasis and protection of its religion, But in that case, there will have to be a dominant religion in the Nigerian state. It means that the Nigerian state would have to be dominantly practicing one certain type of religion for the people to group under that religion together. So that's the point we're making, that the ideational liberal theory centers around the behavior of the state driven by certain socio-cultural ideas, socio-cultural belief systems that have been practiced over time, or that the people identify with, that leaders identify with, because of course leaders are also a very important aspect of the behavior of states, as we have said in the past. Now the second shade, the second category or class of liberal theories is the commercial liberal theory. And here, of course, it's basically talking about economic interdependence, economic systems or economies of states depending on one another for trade, for investment, for economic development, essentially. Okay, so that is what the economic or the commercial liberal theory argues. And of course, you have the Republican liberal theories. Here, there's an emphasis on representative institutions, on laws, the rule of law, the role of leadership, and so all of these issues that are mostly liberal democratic oriented, all right, are issues that are emphasized under the Republican liberal theory. So these are three different classes or different variations, if you want, different colorations, classifications, of the liberal theory. They can either be ideational liberal theories, or they can be They can be commercial liberal theories emphasizing that state economies, trade laws, all of these must be interdependent, must mutually benefit one another, or they can be Republican. All right. So those are just those are various variations or colorations of the liberal theory. Now we'll go ahead to identify some examples of theories that fall under the liberal category of international relations theories. Here we'll just discuss four of them, but of course, like we said, there are so many of such liberal theories which you can see in basically any international relations textbook, or you can find them on other scholarly sources on the internet. Okay, but we'll be talking about the democratic peace theory first. Now, the major argument of the democratic peace theory is the fact that states that are democratic, all right, states that practice democracy are less likely to go or to be in conflict with one another, as opposed to states that practice other types of regimes, maybe authoritarian regimes, or monarchical regimes, or other regime types, basically. All right. So states that are democratic in nature are less likely to go to war, are less likely to be in conflict with one another. So a democratic state and another democratic state are less likely. That means it is very unlikely that two democratic states will go into conflict with one another. But it is more likely that a democratic state and an authoritarian state, will go into conflict. It is more likely. So that is the argument of the democratic peace theory. So the crux of this theory, or the major point in this theory, is the fact that democracy should be promoted. More states should begin to practice democratic principles. More states should begin to practice checks and balances, should begin to practice an independent judicial system. More states should begin to practice accountability and transparency in how they govern. More states should, protect human rights. More states should execute more of these democratic variables, principles, as that would help them to get lesser in conflict, with other states that are equally democratic. All right. But of course, another criticism of this theory is the fact that the theory doesn't take into cognizance the intrastate conflicts that go on within these democratic states themselves individually. Conflicts based or on the basis of religion, conflicts on the basis of ethnicity, conflicts on the basis of culture, and so on and so forth. So this theory doesn't take into cognizance these kinds of conflict. All right. And so the theory seems to be limited. Okay. But essentially, the belief is that democratic states, would less likely go into conflict with one another. Okay. Factors, of course, that motivate peace between these democratic states are listed on the screen. The leaders, are likely to be held accountable or to be held responsible for the losses that arise from war. So if democratic states go into conflict, it is more likely that the people will hold the leaders responsible for whatever casualties are experienced in those conflicts. And of course, that in democratic states, the people are the custodian of power, and leaders want to be right in the sight of their people, of the electorate. So leaders would see themselves as being responsible for whatever action or consequences come out of such conflict with other democratic states, or even with non-democratic states. And so there's more likely to be peace, to be caution, in approaching conflict, violent conflict by democratic states. All right. Of course, there's also the issue of public accountability. and so states are likely to establish or to create institutions that will help them quickly resolve issues before they get out of hand. There are diplomatic missions, there are diplomatic envoy, there are negotiators, mediators that come in and ensure that tension is reduced as quickly as possible, so that this tension do not graduate and become full-blown conflict. All right, and of course the other factors that you see listed there, these are conditions upon which democratic states, are less likely to go, or the reasons why, the factors that are responsible for the increased peace that democratic states experience, or seemingly increased peace that democratic states experience as opposed to other regime types. All right. The collective security theory is another theory that emphasizes the liberal perspective, the liberal philosophy. All right. And of course, the collective security theory argues that security is the business of all, of all the states, of all the actors involved in that interaction. And so a threat to one actor or a threat to one state is a threat on all. And so collective security is based on the risk of retribution, vengeance. You know, it involves responses that could be economic, could be diplomatic. These responses are geared to ensure that no state is left to be a prey to the enemy. Okay, so it is assumed that effective collective security must 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 um, must ensure the collectivity of states. Must ensure that all states are involved, or as many states as possible are involved in such an arrangement, so that the framework, the collective security framework, has a firm foundation, or has a solid backing, All right. Some of the assumptions of this theory is that peace should move beyond defense to include other peaceful settlements of disputes, other arrangements to settling disputes more peacefully. So, collective security will not just be military intervention. Collective security can also be diplomatic intervention. It can also be economic sanctions. All of that are strategies that can be employed under the collective security framework. All right. These are strategies that can be employed under the collective security framework. And of course, this is a mechanism that was designed, or that was believed to replace the balance of power relationship that the realist school of thought argued was the only basis upon which international peace could be maintained. The collective security framework argues that on the contrary, states can look out for one another. States can be there to help one another in terms, or in cases of aggression against such states, or in situations where such states are not able, to protect the integrity of their territory any longer. Other states can come in to the picture. All right. So, of course, aggressors to states that are within a collective security framework will always fear joint retaliation. The meaning of that is that if a state is involved, within or belongs to a collective security framework, any aggression against such a state belonging to that collective security framework risks joint retaliation. It means that the collective security framework would jointly retaliate against such an act of aggression. And so any aggression against such states are very, very carefully thought out, are very, very carefully analyzed or evaluated to ensure that benefits, would most likely outweigh the costs. All right. And member states in such an agreement or in such an arrangement will be able to agree on who the aggressor is. So it's not there has to be a definition of what an aggression is for collective security or for the joint retaliation to take place. So every member of that framework must jointly agree that this and these kinds of behavior are what constitutes aggression against any member of ours. All right. And of course, it's not limited to only military concerns. Like I said, there are a wide range of other security issues. There are environmental security issues, there are food security issues, there are global epidemic issues, like we're currently facing, and so many other kinds of issues that fall under the purview of the collective security arrangement. And of course, one major principle, one major factor that ensures that this arrangement is successful is the fact that member states, must be committed. Member states must be they must be committed to that arrangement. They must be committed in material resource. They must be committed in human resource. They must be committed in technical assistance. They must be committed in intelligence. They must be fully committed to ensure that such a framework is effective. All right. And of course, they can only be so committed when there's something in it for them as well. All right. So the collective security framework is very, very key because that seems to be one key philosophy or ideology that is driving collective response that we are seeing in contemporary times to global crisis, global health crisis, global food crisis, global environmental crisis. There seems to be some kind of collaborative, collective rallying around to help address or manage these kinds of issues. All right, so we talked about national commitment. The states, the members of such an arrangement must be committed completely to ensuring that that arrangement, is successful. All right, and there are three conditions that have been given here for the success of such an agreement or such an arrangement to help prevent conflicts, to help prevent wars. And some of those conditions are that number one, such a collective security framework must be able to assemble a military force that is stronger than that of the aggressor. So the military force that is assembled by the collective security framework put together must be stronger, evidently, must be stronger than the military force of the aggressor against any member of such a state. So European states, for instance, have put together the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. NATO is more of a military response, on behalf of European states. All right. So it is believed that any aggression against a member of the NATO, the military force of the NATO should be able to match and overwhelm the military force of such an aggression. That is one key factor, that to make such an arrangement a successful one to prevent conflict. Another factor is that there should be a joint belief. There should be a joint understanding. There should be a joint acceptance of international order, international peace, of the likelihood of international peace. So every member of this collective security framework must believe that international security, international peace, international stability is possible. So essentially, they must all have the same ideology about global security, about global peace, and that is important so that they can all work together. They can all work in concert to help promote, and ensure such international peace, such global order that they believe in. All right. And finally, is that members of this collective security framework must be willing to let go of some part of their national interests, to accommodate the interest of others, because when states come together in a collective role, or when states come together to cooperate, then such states must be willing to let go of some of their national interests. They must be willing to meet the other parties halfway. They must be willing to make some compromise. They must be willing to lose some. All right. That's why the liberal framework, the liberal theory, argues more for a non-zero sum outcome of relationships among states in the international system. Non-zero sum, meaning that states in such a relationship are willing to lose some, are willing to win some. So it is a win-win situation for all the parties involved in such an agreement. So these are three conditions under which collective security can be successful, or can help to either prevent, respond, or manage any crisis. Number one, we said that the force of the collective framework must be able to stand and withstand and overwhelm the force of the aggressor, whoever the aggressor is, whether it is a state aggressing, being aggressive or carrying out an act of aggression against another state, or whether it is a natural disaster or an epidemic. The force of the collective must be so much so that it's able to match the force of the aggressor. All right. The second thing is that all the members of that collective security framework must have the same ideologies. They must have the same belief about the world order, about international peace and security. And finally, they must be willing to make some compromise in pursuit of these ideologies and, of course, of the interest of the collective. All right. Pluralism is another theory. It's another liberal theory of international relations. All right. And pluralism, of course, argues that policies are a result of competing interests. Policies are not just single-handedly made by one actor, by one individual, by one organization or group. Policies and politics generally, international politics, particularly from the actor's perspective, the interests, the policies, the behavior of states, of other actors, are a consequence of competing interests. So many interests, coming together and somehow finding a balance, by which all these interests, are met considerably. That's what the plural theory argues. And so, for any foreign policy decision to be made, so many things go, into making that foreign policy. What is the will of the people? What is the sentiment of the people? What is the desire of the investors that are within such a state? What is the desire of the local companies that are within such a state, foreign investors within such a state? What is the desire of the international community to which these states belongs to, international organizations that this state belongs to? What is the pleasure of such international organizations? So all of these variables, all of these factors are put into consideration, and they are ultimately what determine the foreign policy of the state. All right. So policies are a result of such collective effort, such competing interests, harvesting all the interests and trying to find a balance. All right. So the plural theory rejects the argument that politics is a concentration of power. The power is concentrated in the hands of the state, and so the state is the ultimate determinant of how it behaves, of what it does and what policies it pursues. Pluralism says that state behavior is a consequence of a multitude of factors to which the state is subject to, which influences the state largely, essentially. Civil society groups can influence the state, can get the state to do things that are in favor of the civil societies. NGOs can do the same. Multinationals can do the same. Local investors can do the same. Individuals, celebrities who have fame, who have popularity, can also do the same. So that these are the sources of the policies, of the programs, of the interests that states pursue. So some of the assumptions of the plural theory are that, number one, non-state actors are very, very important. Civil society groups are important, NGOs are important, individuals are important. All of these non-state actors, sub-state actors equally are important in the scheme of things. All right. Resources, the second assumption is that resources, including power, it's not constituted in a particular place. So you can't say that the state is a custodian of whatever resource, whether it is political power or economic power or any other kind of resource that is necessary to run the state. Resources are subjective, they are scattered. Of course, resources in this case, for instance, if we talk about economic resources are a consequence of investments that are done by foreign investors. They're a consequence of local investments. They're a consequence of the film entertainment industry's investments. They're a consequence of local businesses investing, and thriving. They're a function of even small scale businesses as well. Low income earning businesses. All of these are what constitutes collectively the economic power of the state. So if these interests are not protected, are not guaranteed, are not promoted, then of course there isn't any economic power. So resources are also aggregated. Resources are gathered. Resources are collected from a multitude of sources. Of sources. All right, and these resources, of course, are available to nearly everyone. Resources are available to nearly everyone as well. The everyone in this sense being every actor. All right, so every actor has access to resources that are available in the interactions on the international stage, be they power, be they influence, be they negotiation. All of these are resources that are useful in the international system. All right, and all actors have access to such resources. So resources are not they are not owned by some particular actor or state or non-state actors. All right. Of course, these are other assumptions of the plural theory. Potential power outweighs the amount of actual power. The potential power of a state. The fact that the potential, that's the total amount or the total extent of the power of a state outweighs the actual power that the state exhibits at any point in time. So when you see a state exhibiting a particular kind of power or a particular kind of influence, it's actual power, it's the real power that it has is a lot more than what such a state is actually exhibiting. All right, and of course the other ones you see there are also equally assumptions of the plural theory. No one state is all powerful. Of course, we said that power is relative, so no single state can boast of being all powerful. Even the most powerful states or the most powerful countries in the world, cannot completely boast of being, all powerful, because power is relative. And of course, the international agenda is also extensive. It's not restricted to power. So there are other issues that are involved in the international agenda. So essentially, the plural theory is saying that there are multiple sides to international relations. There's not just one side to it. Realism argues that there are not so many sides to international relations. There's just power, there are interests, there are there are interests, there's power, there's security. These are the core issues, the core concerns of the realist theory. But the liberal theory, the plural theory, which is one of the liberal categories, or which is a theory under the liberal category, argues that in addition to power, in addition to security, in addition to national interest, of course, all of these are concerns, are a part of the agenda, of the international agenda. There are also issues of environmental security. There are also issues of public health safety. There are also issues of natural disaster. There are also issues of, human rights protection, gender equality. All of these are equally issues, So there are multiple sides, plurality. There are so many sides. It is the opposite of singularism. All right. So pluralism means that there are so many sides to the issue. There are so many sides to resources. It's not just power resources that it's not just power that is a resource. There are so many other resources. There are diplomatic resources. There are natural resources. So resources vary. All right. If we talk about power also, power varies itself. Power as a resource varies. There is military power, there is economic power, there is political power. So it's multiple sides to international relations. That's what the plural theory argues. And then finally, you have the complex interdependence theory. Complex interdependence theory. All right. This theory basically argues that international relations is a connection that is very complex. International relation is a complex, connection, transnational connection of so many entities that are interdependent on one another. States, non-state actors, all the actors involved in international relations are inherently interdependent. It means that they need each other to thrive, to survive. All right? The civil societies need the state. The state needs the international organizations. International organizations need NGOs. So there is so much interconnectedness, interdependence, among the actors that exist in international relations. And this connection is complex. That's why it is called complex interdependence theory. All right? So many complex connections, complex interdependence, among actors. All right. So the fortune of these actors, be they state or non-state actors, their fortunes are intertwined. And so these actors are forced to cooperate because they cannot exist without one another. And so they have to come to the table. They have to desire to cooperate. They have to desire to, sit, negotiate, and come to a compromise because their existence basically depends on it. Their existence depends on it. All right. So the liberal category of theories argues that liberalism is a function of individuals determining policy, individual preferences, of course, determining policy as well. It's a function of international organizations, international laws, and the importance, the role that these play in the international system, and of course, some other factors that result in the complex interdependence theory is the fact that there are multiple channels of action, between societies. There are multiple channels of actions. And how do we mean multiple channels of action? There is the social media today, there's the print media, there's the broadcast media. All of these are multiple channels of action. There are so many outlets. There's so many outlets by which the same function can occur, and so actors are basically overwhelmed. All right, Actors are overwhelmed. There are so many channels of purchase. You can purchase your commodities online. You can purchase in a store. You can go to the, and of course stores have various categories, so multiple channels of interaction, and so that has further complicated and made more complex the interdependence among states. And of course the second factor is that there's no hierarchy of issues. There's no hierarchy of issues. There's no issue that is more important than the other. All issues in international relations are equally important. The issues of the environment are as important as the issue of epidemic, as important as the issue of gender equality. So all the issues demand the same kind of attention. And that further complicates and makes more complex interdependence of these actors. All right. And of course, it argues that there must be a reduction in the use of military power as well because of this interconnectedness. So we must drop our arms, states must drop their military weapons, and they must sit at the table and negotiate. How do we come out? How do we manage these complexities that we find ourselves in? All right. In conclusion, the points we're making here is that liberalism emphasizes individual influences on states, but also emphasizes the behavior of actors that must align with those of other actors. All right, actors must come together, must cooperate in order to achieve their interests. There must be that cooperation, and so individuals have a role to play in ensuring that this cooperation is achieved. Liberalism also pays attention not just to the state, but to citizens as well, to individuals, human rights, gender equality, human security. All of these are equally important issues for liberalism. The role of the state, the role of international organizations, rather, the role of international laws. All of these are important issues which liberalism emphasizes. And finally, liberalism argues that the only time conflict can be on the table is when all these other non-violent diplomatic strategies have been exhausted. All right, so liberalism does not completely rule out the fact that states, can involve, or actors can be involved in violent conflict, that states can go to war. Liberalism does not rule out that fact completely, but it argues that this can only happen, after every other strategy of diplomacy, every other strategy of non-violence has been exploited, and still there's no way forward. And so violent conflict should be a last resort. All right. So these are some of the issues that I think are pertinent, are important in this discussion around the liberal category of international relations theories. I hope that you have understood. Like I said, lessons on theory are a little abstract, a little complex, and you need to read, wider. You need to consult other materials to try and understand the arguments that are made in this presentation. If you have questions, if you have comments, certainly we can take the conversation further. Thank you so much for listening.